Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Stock, and this is a space for men who are ready to move beyond outdated models of masculinity and into something more honest, connected, and whole. Sometimes suffering is the only thing that wakes us up and pushes us to transform our approach to life. Whether we're experiencing it ourselves or watching it unfold in the lives of others, suffering often becomes the catalyst for real change. A part of me hates admitting that. I wish it weren't necessary, but it feels like one of those inescapable truths of being human. My next guest knows this terrain well. His own transformational journey began while working at a domestic violence shelter, an experience that shifted his consciousness and set him on a new mission, engaging men and boys in violence prevention in their lives and in communities. In his current work, certified coach Michael Brasher focuses on helping men, leaders, and seekers reconnect with themselves, heal inherited patterns, and live with greater integrity, clarity, and depth. And as a fellow Tucsonan, he earns a few extra points in my book. So let's hear the story of how suffering woke this man up and the path he's been on ever since. Welcome to the New Masculine, Michael.
Thank you, Travis. I am so glad to be here with you today. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation.
When I found out that you lived in Tucson, I was like, oh, I'm interested already.
I love it.
So is there anything I didn't mention about you in the intro to that feels important for people to know about you before we jump into the conversation?
I'll just say I'm a dad and a son. And I think that's important for me because I like to think about how we are sort of working with the generational energy we've inherited, right? So I think that's an important part of my story.
Oh, it's such an important part of like the framework that I bring to my coaching work with men is we are not products of just our own choosing. We are products of the
Right.
generations before us. We are
Yes.
continuing to grow generations below us. And so part of the sort of taking responsibility, not just for our own experience, but for the men around us on both directions.
Yeah.
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 Well, let's hear a little bit about your story. So I always like to start from understanding what was it like for you growing up as a boy, and what were the things you were learning about what you needed to be in order to become a man?
Yeah, so I was the youngest of 5 kids. I had 3 older brothers and an older sister. I think my dad had also grown up with a lot of brothers. His dad was a NASA engineer and an alcoholic. Um, and just honestly, a lot of old school, white, stereotypical American masculinity. I think about my dad's example, and so then what I was getting from him, a lot of things that, on the surface can't even be positive, but just like he always had the answer. He always had it together. He was always positive. We never saw him cry, never saw him express sadness, never saw him express fear or grief or any vulnerability. Um, and he seemed successful, and so I think a lot of what I was getting is like this is the provider, this is the legitimate man. All of the fear and grief and weak parts, you need to like tuck those in and
Mhm.
just always be like a leader who's in charge and in control, and that's how you have value.
Mm. Yeah, isn't that so true that so many of us have learned that as a man, we need to have the answer to everything? We can't actually just not know or admit
Yeah,
that we don't know that
yeah,
even that's a sense of weakness. So
yeah,
wild how we put such high expectations on ourselves to know, and how that closes us off to learning anything new because we aren't willing to say I don't know or to learn from others.
yeah, 100%. And again, it like in a lot of relationships and contexts, it can seem like a really valuable trait, right? But when that thing is just toggled on all the time, always know, always have the answer. Of course, what we know is over a long enough time, there's a lot of liabilities in living in the world, and that way, a lot of being out of balance.
hmm So, as a kid, how were you experiencing that? Like, are you conscious now looking back on that little kid, what that was shaping in you?
So I think there was a lot of, like, grief and trauma in my family. My
Mm,
brothers were acting out, they were getting in trouble at school, getting in trouble with the law. Um, there's a lot of disruption in my home, and I think part of how I piece it together is, um, I mean, it was really impacting me. You know, the trauma in my house was really impacting me, but I didn't talk to a single person on earth about it, probably until I was in my early 20s.
mm,
And it wasn't even like, I don't wanna talk about it, I'm ashamed of it, like, it was more like, it just never even would have occurred to me to talk about it because I was so living so deep in the example of, like, manhood and masculinity that lived in my family, which is like, we're in control, we're confident, we're happy, we have the answers, like, life's tough, get a helmet, you know, I just, like, never even occurred to me like, "Oh, I've got a lot of trauma and pain, and I should talk to somebody about it."
mm. Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's so interesting for me to reflect on with people is there's sort of those explicit rules of our families, the ones that are told to us that are made
Yeah,
very clear and are out in the open, and then there's the other ones that are just implied, that are so woven into the fabric of how we show up with each other that we don't
yeah,
even question them. So it's interesting to think of like you were carrying a ton of weight and yet not really even that aware of it or aware there
yeah,
was something you could do with it. It's so
right,
interesting how even the implied rules shape so much of how we approach our lives.
yeah, yeah,
So tell me a little bit about maybe what was it that changed for you that got you in
yeah.
your early 20s to be even able to talk about it.
I'll point to a few things. One, funny enough, man, I took a feminist theology class
Oh,
at
you're
this.
breaking the rules of of what you were taught already,
Yeah,
man.
yeah, you know, so I went to this small liberal arts Christian college, like, you know, sort of like following my family's footsteps, but they had a feminist theology class. And just as soon as I began to like read it, it began unraveling quite a bit for me.
Mm,
Um, I began to think about just, you know, in the way that something like feminist literature, you know, certain kinds of experience from people, you know, that have been marginalized, when they're giving language to pain that you've observed but nobody talks about, right?
mhm,
And so in reading sort of some feminist work, I began to realize like, man, there's so much about my upbringing and what I got from my family that they are convinced is true, that they've sold me on hook, line, and sinker. But when I look at how my life feels, a lot of this does not work for me. It does not feel good. Um, and so I think that was one thing where it gave me some language that I didn't have for an experience that was in my body. And so it just sort of made all of this grief become conscious, I think, in some ways. Um, and I think the other thing I'd point to is just, you know, all of those repressed griefs and traumas and hurts from my upbringing. I think I just got to a point around that same time where that pain just like couldn't be suppressed
mhm.
anymore. And it really began to overwhelm me. And the thing I would say is like I began a process of letting my heart break, which for me is always like a profound antidote to sort of that like toxic socialization we can get as men to just, you know, have all the answers.
Oof, that feels like a beautiful and yet a tough invitation to somebody to like go, here's the antidote. It's heartbreak.
Yeah.
Here, want to step into
Yeah.
this? Like, who wants to step into
Yes.
heartbreak as an antidote?
Yes.
And
That's
yet,
right.
so powerful to hear.
Yeah.
So, what did that look like for you as a 20 some year old that was having your heart break, that was unable to hold the grief in anymore?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just to be totally clear, it was a wreck. It was really messy. I became really angry,
Hmm.
you know, because I was suddenly was just like, man, like I feel really upset at my family. I feel really upset at my upbringing. I feel really upset that like, you know, yeah, just like there's a lot of like trauma in our house and nobody was telling the truth about it. And people were putting these like silly narratives about it. And it was also just kind of like disillusionment with a lot of our society and culture too. So I think I was angry. I was like very angry, I think, for a few years. Um, I found myself like becoming addicted, like
Mm,
trying to drink and use drugs as a palliative, right? As a medication. It's like, well, I'm hurting overwhelmingly. There's nothing in my community that helps men legitimately metabolize and be with their pain in good and wonderful ways. Um, I was like in my early 20s. And so I'm like looking around, well, like, what are the other guys in my life doing? I'm like, well, they're drinking. They're eating, drinking, and being merry, right? They're forgetting everything,
yeah.
right? Um, and so I tried that, and I think it wasn't until I began to finally come in more and more contact um, with like healers, healing people, feminist mentors who began to like really get their hands on me and try to help guide me. I definitely went through a period until then where I was just lost.
Hmm. I appreciate you sharing that because I think it points to looking at how many men out there are really, really angry and getting curious what's underneath that. Is it possibly grief? Is it possibly
Yeah,
heartbreak? Is it
yeah,
possibly the weight of what you've been told you needed to carry that
yeah,
something inside of you knows is impossible? And so there's a part of you that's rebelling against it. Like so often anger is one of the few emotions that men are allowed to express.
yeah,
And yet so little curiosity is brought to what's underneath that.
fully.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've come to increasingly explain and understand men's work
Mhm.
as grief work,
Mhm.
learning how to bring consciousness to the pain that we've been so busy and so incentivized into disowning.
Yes, yes. I'm fully aligned with that. And it's one of the things that when I'm talking to people who lead men's work, I'm trying to sort of explore with them is like so much of men's work doesn't seem to fully address that. It
Yeah.
can still be about endurance and
Yeah.
intensity and
Yep.
achievement and
Yeah.
productivity and categorizing people as like high worth people. And it's just like, whoa, there's so much
Yeah.
pain underneath all of that that we're not addressing, that we're running away from. I really appreciate that you can say that so clearly. I'm sure it's not easy for a lot of people to hear, and some people
For
might have
sure.
arguments against it. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think that's aligned with what I'm trying to bring into men's work is an integration, acceptance, and ability to hold space for the things we've had to cut off from ourselves,
Yes. Fully.
whether that's grief, whether that's labeled as things that are traditionally feminine,
Yeah.
whether that's sensitivity,
Yep.
whether that's um, our urges and sexualities and
Mhm.
ways of expressing ourselves that don't fit into the narrow boxes
Yeah.
that were given to us.
Yeah.
So thank you for saying that so clearly.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm sensing a theme based on already what I know about you and what you're laying out here, that
Yeah.
women, whether that's through their writing in feminist literature
Yeah.
or the future work that you started to do that kind of continued your unraveling, sounds like
Yeah.
women have been a big part of your own growth as a person and a big part of how you've transformed your own self. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I will always say, man, I am downstream and a lot of different levels of exceptional, pioneering, courageous, gutsy feminist labor. And I include in that, like, my own mom who probably didn't identify as a feminist, but just a lot of women who are laboring for the people in their community, for the people that they love, who have labored for me to wake up and extract my head from my butt. And like I honor all that work honestly
Yeah,
because part of honoring it is saying like, hey, I'm not perfect. I still have a long way to go, but like a lot of it's worked too. So thank you. Like thanks for doing that.
yeah. Yeah, that I often feel that this podcast, this work that I'm doing around men and masculinity is in honoring of how much emotional and mental labor women have been doing around this stuff for
Yeah.
so long,
Yeah.
and trying really hard to get men to take some responsibility and ownership in this
Yes.
conversation and then in this shift as well.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the transformation went on.
Yeah.
So you're angry, you're grieving,
Yeah.
you're learning that you need to make space for that. How did you actually go about transforming into closer to the man that you are now?
Yeah. So a few pivotal women in my life for sure who really just challenged me, said things that hurt me, all
Hmm.
these things, right? And what really like shifted it for me is I found myself, uh, I came to Arizona from Miami to take a gap year between my master's and PhD, and I found myself working at a domestic violence shelter. Almost exclusively women on staff, almost exclusively women seeking our services. I found myself facilitating a therapeutic art program. Um, and what happened, there's a few kind of key points here. First, as I just began to sit and listen to these women's stories, why are you here? What are you trying to escape? What happened? Listening to the stories of these kids talk about their dads, you know, this tsunami of pain in our community, everyday pain, generational everyday pain in the United States. I just began to like witness it, become present to
Yeah.
it. Um, as I became present to that, I understood like my entire family system and upbringing
Hmm.
anew,
Hmm.
you know. Um, it was like, oh, this is it. It's men's violence against women. It's why my family is the way it is. My dad, my mom, my brothers, my dad's dad, why I've been doing what I've been doing, all the self-destruction, harm I've caused. Um, so that was like this massive consciousness shift. And then the second part of it, I'll just say, um, the women that run this domestic violence shelter, at a certain point, they came to me and said, "Hey, Michael, we're organizing an experimental pilot men's program that's premised on the question of what would it take to get men to take responsibility for ending gender-based violence in our communities." And they said, we need men to go through it. Would you go through it just as a guy, just as a person? Um, And I said, "Yes." And I was all gung ho. I had demonized these abusive men. I was working with their wives and children, and I was like, I have my big cape on. I'm gonna come be a hero and save the day. Utter bullshit, to be honest, right? But that's where I was.
Sure.
And what I discovered though is that in my own ways, I was really doing the same thing as a lot of these abusive men, and that these abusive men, you know, they were doing it in worse ways a lot of times for sure, but they were just doing what all the men in our community are trained to do when it comes to how do we relate to women? How do we demonstrate power and control? How do we relate to emotions? What are the rules as a man that will get you love and respect from other men? And so we began to talk in this men's program, and I realized like, oh my gosh, like I'm ground zero for this work. It's not out there. It's not these other guys. Uh, I need to, if I want to create safety for women in this community, if I want to end this issue, I have to start getting so much more real about how I've living, how I've lived, what I've internalized, what I'm reproducing. And so that for me was really the beginning of a really profound journey. And that is how I describe that, all of that, right? It's just like the process of like letting my heart break, letting all
Mm,
this stuff in so that I could become real.
mm. Wow, I bet your ego loved noticing that you couldn't just keep them separate out there as the problem and you being the hero.
Yeah, for sure. The ego wasn't really on board with the process.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, I find that to be true in my life, that if I have created a clear separation between like those out there
Yeah,
and me, I'm probably rejecting something or trying not to see something about where
yeah,
that exists in me. And it
yeah,
doesn't mean that it is one for one, meaning that
Yeah.
the exact behaviors I'm seeing in someone else are the same behaviors.
Right.
But there is something in me that is creating that separation for a reason. And for me, it's usually a clue that I need to look inward. So,
Yeah.
as I said, not easy work, but it is good work. And as you said, it's like the antidote is actually the heartbreak, being able to sit with it, to be with it, to let it
Yeah.
unravel what was. Um, and it makes sense to me why a lot of people avoid that, because who wants to feel heartbreak?
Yeah, it's like the pain is baked in some regards when it comes to like living. Like grief work is built into this thing. It's not a bug, it's a feature. It's for
Hmm.
all of us is a lot of grief work. Um, so then for me it's just like, so what kinds of pain am I going to be present for, and hopefully if I can make some of this old pain conscious, if I can let some painful truths in, um, it can open me up to better things.
Hmm. So let's say there's a listener that's hearing that as truth and recognizing that that is part of the journey forward, is to let that in. What are some of the ways in which a man can open himself to that or
Yeah.
can navigate that uncharted waters?
Yeah. I'll give three things. So first of all, something that always recommend. You can probably tell already, but I lead some book clubs. I always recommend that people need to pick up a feminist book. Men need to pick up a
Mm,
feminist book. Even if it's just like, just try to open yourself up to a different perspective
hmm.
when it comes to gender and society. Um, and create a context in which you can be surprised, in which you can learn, in which you can gain new perspective. If you read one book every few months, it doesn't have to become the centerpiece of your identity, but man, what it's going to do for me as a dad, as a partner, as a friend, as a family member is transformative. The
Mm,
work I've done means so much to my sister, for example.
uh,
And so I think stuff as simple as like reading a book or listening to a podcast is something like men can easily like dismiss or denigrate. And I'm like, I don't know. And the guys I know who every now and then crack a feminist book are like some pretty awesome dudes. Um,
hell
that's
yeah.
one I'd say. The other thing, I think too is just like acknowledge where we've been harmful.
Mm,
I know that is some tough work, but I think it's really important. It's just a part of like letting the ego break a little, letting some of the pain in. Um, And I think I see so many men in my work on some of this stuff who just want to defend.
mm.
Like, "Oh, I'm the least sexist guy on earth. I've never been unkind or disrespectful to a woman." And I'm like, "Bro, I know you. Yes, you have. Yes, yes, you have, dude." But the thing is, like, they mean it and they don't feel like they're lying when they're
Yeah.
like, "I'm the greatest feminist ally on earth." So I think like that developing that self-awareness to say, like, where have I been harmful. I think that's an important part. Third, last thing I'll say, is that grief word piece. I think within ourselves, most of us as men, what we learned is that masculine power and pain, we don't know how those two things can be in the same spot, right? Like I can be confident, charismatic, charming, in control. A man, I can be in grief.
Uh,
What's it like for these things to be in one body? And so I think as a result, what we're trained in, maybe unconsciously, maybe implicitly, is to say, my pain's not that big of a deal,
yeah.
right? It's not that big. Everybody has it. We've all been there. You know what? That's in the past. Let the past be in the past. I can't change it. I can't do anything about it. Why spend all that time in the past? And the truth is, I think a lot of us as men, we're living with massive amounts of disowned pain in our body today that's really impacting our relationships. It's impacting our ability to be present with ourselves and others. Um, and I think if we can begin that process of saying, like, oh, yeah, I have a lot of stuff I need to grieve. I've had my heart broken a lot of times and I have never really given it a lot of attention, but I want to. Um, I think that's such a fundamental part as a man of really like waking up in the world.
Yeah, it's so true. I even find that difficult in myself, and it's where I continue working is like how to really let myself own that pain that's there. And I, especially as somebody that's like in a helping profession, I can be so focused on helping other people with their pain and creating space for that, that I will put mine on the shelf really quickly as a way of showing up for others. And so this is a great example of what you're talking about, of like looking inward at myself to see like I may not I may think of myself as a good person because I hold space for other people in their pain, but I'm still disowning mine. And
Yeah,
that creates challenges in my relationships and creates challenges in the way that I move through the world. And so it's like, this is that work of looking inward where I say, like, well, I'm a good person because I'm helping others do that work.
yeah,
And yet, if I don't include myself in that, then I'm still playing in the same system.
yeah. Can I ask you a question about it, Travis?
Yeah, please.
When that part of you that really feels like it's important to like minimize your own pain or just like put it on the back burner. I'll get to it later. What do you think that part of you is doing?
I think a couple things come to mind. I think in some ways I have learned to utilize the gifts that I have, the things that I feel like I'm good at. I've used them in ways that it's where I source my worth and value as a person. And if I'm good at holding space for others and I'm good at never shaming somebody for their feelings and keep giving space for them to be in the heartbreak, that gives me sense of worth and purpose. But if I focus in on my own, I don't get that same payoff from it.
Mm,
I
mm,
get, I just feel the heartbreak and the grief and I was like, well, I spent like most of my 20s in depression and I don't want to go back
yeah,
to that. And
yeah,
like, so, I think it puts a challenge to my sense of how I source worth and value
yeah,
to turn that inwards, I think is probably one of the primary things. I think also there are some storylines about how I've seen men show up in their relationships, and I've redefined being a man as a being of service to others in
okay,
some ways,
I see.
to the point where it leaves me out of the equation again. It's sort of like a
Yeah,
reactionary, well, I'm not going to be that, so I'm going to be
right,
this.
right. No, it's really beautiful insight, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and I just appreciate um your vulnerability and honesty. And I wanted to ask because like when you say it, I'm like, wow, you're speaking for me. I'm sure you're
Hmm.
speaking for so many men who are listening to this. It's so valuable to hear another man tell the truth that much about what goes on with their pain. So I think just like hearing you say like, yeah, and this is where it's coming from and this is what I'm doing is just yeah, it's really important for us to hear.
It's so active in my life right now. I think I'm in a real rebalancing phase around how do I meet my needs? How do I make sure my needs are present? My husband went through a couple years of pretty tumultuous years, not based on his own choosing, some health
Yeah.
issues, some employment issues, some things that have really kicked me into overdrive around, oh, I
Mm,
have to show up for someone else.
got it.
All while running my own business, all while trying to live through this world that we live in. It's
Yeah.
maddening.
Plus that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I just have realized, like, very recently how I don't have shame around the choices I've made. It's the choices I thought were the right choices in the moment, and maybe
Yeah.
they were. And I also need to rebalance things so that I can include myself in there. Because there is a
Yeah.
part of me that struggles. There is a part of me that has pain and fear about lots of different things.
Yeah.
And I've kind of been putting those on the shelf to try to be a good husband and to be a good person. And I can have lots of arguments whether that's how I should do it, and
Yeah.
I did it, and so I can really stand behind myself, but I can also recognize that something else needs to happen.
And if I can just say, like, I think in my like conversations and work about, yeah, masculinity, but just life too, it's just like, it takes all kinds. There's a season for everything.
Hmm.
Like sometimes do we have to put our head down and get through? Like, yeah, to be
Yeah.
honest, not
Yeah.
not what I aspire
Yeah.
to. And that
Uh-huh.
that fact really butts up against my commitments to break some generational patterns in my family sometimes, for example.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's just like we all go through those seasons, right? Where sometimes it's like that. And for me, I'm like, I know that making room for my grief, like I have to have a little discipline about it. Cause there's life stuff and sometimes it's like that. But I also just know it's like, man, every now and then I need to have a little discipline, a little appointment on my calendar that's waiting for me. That's like, hey, Michael, let's be present
Mm,
with all that pain, old pain, generational pain, whatever. Let's like spend a little bit of time with it. Um, because it's so good for me. But I think like even in that, there's balance because there's some seasons of life where I'm like, I don't have room for that. And at the same time, I know I can't get too far without doing it at all.
mm. That so well describes the kind of phase I've been in. My head has been down, and I've been making conscious choices around like, who do I want to be on the other side of this? Like, how do I want to look back at the choices I've made and feel proud? And I do feel like I made good choices for the person I love and the in the life that we're living.
Yeah.
And I also feel like I haven't been disciplined enough at making
Yeah.
that time for myself to like actually sit with my own grief and to sit with my own fears that these things bring up and to
Yeah.
just allow my heart to break
Yeah.
in this process too.
Right.
So, yeah, you're putting very good words to the phase I've been in and the phase that I'm stepping into, which is to have a little more discipline around what comes up for me and to be able to sit
Yeah.
with it.
Beautiful.
As you were listing those three things
Mhm.
that you were saying that guys can do, one of the key things that you touched on that I feel in there that can be a challenge to any one of those three parts is
Yeah.
how much we may as men want to defend. So if you read a
Yeah.
feminist book, how we want to defend our
Yeah.
behavior, we want to
Yeah.
defend that we're not one of those men, to
Yeah.
defend that we're a good like we want to defend in that.
Yeah.
When you bring up like really being willing to look at where are you
Yeah.
capable of harm as a person,
Yeah.
um, we want to defend against that.
Yeah.
And when grief is present, certainly part of what I have been doing by keeping my head down is defending against my
Yeah.
own heartbreak.
Yeah.
And so, how do we as men really do the
Yeah.
work around this defensiveness thing that
Yeah.
keeps coming up for us?
Yeah. I love that you keyed in on that. Like to me, it is like speaking of ground zero of men's work.
Hmm.
Um, it's the spot to go right into. Just go and be like, cool, I'm rolling up my sleeves and I'm gonna mess with this part of myself because it's the place, you know, it's the place of refusal first and foremost. For starters, that's where it is. It's like, don't go there. Hey, I'm the nicest guy on earth, but don't go there. Right? It's a thing we do.
Hmm.
And so when we begin to like let people go there because it's been such an abandoned place, we can see huge it's like rocket fuel for our growth,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When we let people go where we haven't been letting them go. Um, so something I'm really interested in is this relationship between shame and accountability. I think when shame is high, we can't practice accountability. And I think when we begin to practice accountability, it by necessity makes shame recede, which is really curious
Mm.
because what we think is accountability is going to be shame inducing, right? Because I'm going to cop to the fact that I don't know everything, that I make mistakes, that I'm selfish, that I can be vengeful, all these things, right? And so I think when shame is high, it can come off as arrogance, right? But it's like, well, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that I'm a bad person. I'm afraid these things are going to be true about me. So I play defense everywhere because to make it not true, right? But that actually kind of feeds the fear. It protects the fear. The fear is in charge, right? Whereas when I began, and I'll give you a really practical tool that I love to use for myself, and I love to use it with men to begin to do some work on this. But when we begin to ask people for feedback, that's the
Yeah.
entry point.
Uh-huh.
It builds such love. It builds such compassion. It builds mercifulness in our relationships, right? Um, and so that to me is really the place. Like, and I don't want to be caught up in my own head trying to judge myself. Did I do this wrong? Am I doing this bad? But I want to bring it to my relationships. So something that I coach a lot of men on is developing a go-to question that I can take to the people in my relationships. And it's just an open-ended, short question to solicit feedback from people. I'll give you an example of it. Uh, you know, what's one thing that I could shift about how I'm showing up in our relationship right now that would make your life better? Then I'm just going to be quiet. I'm going to let them answer. I'm going to believe what they say. I'm not going to provide an explanation or a justification or a defense or a minimization. And I'm going to actually like thank them for it and do some work around whatever I hear. And when men begin to implement that question, you start with the safest person in your life. If it's your wife, if it's your child, if it's a buddy, and then you slowly take new territory in your life by asking it to riskier and riskier people. And what we find is that like actually accountability and getting feedback, it's so empowering. It builds such intimacy. It increases trust. But it's really something that's like we just have to begin to practice it before we feel good about it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As I put myself in the listener's chair to that question, I encourage people to check in. How much did your nervous system react to that? How much did you defend against it? How much did that feel like? Because like there's so much perceived risk in asking a question like that, because someone's
Yeah.
going to tell you, we may think that someone's going to tell us we're wrong, we're bad, we're awful, we're harmful, we're anything, and the ego will defend against that. So this is that exact place we're talking about like this piece around how much we want to defend, and instead of being able to sit with someone's perspective on us. And so this is one of those key questions that, yeah, it involves some risk. It involves risk to the ego. It involves risk to how you hold your own identity, how you see yourself. And yet this is one of those moments that we can lean into those sort of traditionally masculine traits, which are like
Yeah.
risk taking and bravery,
Yeah.
and take that risk, be
Yeah.
brave. Definitely start with people who are trustworthy, that you
Hmm.
trust, that
Hmm.
that care about you, not just somebody that's trying to harm you, but somebody that's willing to say the truth, but infused with a lot of care.
Yeah.
And then expand that. I think that's our safety is important. Our
Yes.
psychological and emotional safety is important when we do this work, but be brave. Take that risk. See what happens on the other side of it. See if there is any truth that you can find in the feedback you get.
Yeah. And I just think it's just like we have to overcome our own hubris and ego and self-deception, right? Like I'm in control of everything I do. I never make mistakes. I'm super intentional. I'm never like not intentional. Like that's talk I could give myself. Some days I do. It's not true.
It's like you were just like reading my mind of all the things that go through my head. Wow, that was kind of trippy.
Well, right. But it is. It's so common, and so that's why it's like it's good medicine for myself, but it's also great medicine for my relationships. And to even ask the question requires me to step out of the man box, right? Of the stereotypes of like a real man is always in control. I'm instantly saying, hey, I care about how I impact you. Hey, I don't know everything about myself or our relationship. Hey, I do make mistakes. I require grace from people. I have blind spots. Like that's all communicated just in the asking. So I tell people it's like some of the biggest medicine that comes out of this discipline and this practice. It almost doesn't even matter what they tell you. It it does, and my life gets better because of the things people have told me, or my relationships, everything gets better, but there's so much medicine in just becoming the type of person that wants to know and say it to people, that is really where the transformation and then all the wonderful stuff you learn and expanded perspective is just gravy.
Mm. So with the knowledge that I'm asking you to take another step into risk and vulnerability here, see if you're open to that.
Yeah.
If you Have you ever asked that question in your relationships?
Yeah, for sure.
And what's one piece of feedback you've been given around
Yeah.
something you could shift?
Yeah, and I'll share one that's like right there on the top of my head, and if you're like, let's find more, I've gotten plenty of feedback. Um, well, two, I have two kids, and I asked them both recently. My daughter gave me feedback that she felt like we were rushing everybody too much.
Mm,
She's like, I don't like always being in a hurry. I feel like everybody's always like rushing us. And I could have been in my like, oh, kids don't understand. Well, like, honey, you need and what a failure it would have been had I gone into that. Right. She didn't need education. I invited her to tell me. Now I got to follow through with my end of the bargain and believe that she's wise and knowledgeable. Um, and I was just like, yeah, I can see 100% what you're talking about. It sucks. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to do better. I'm going to try to
mm,
at least just find some opportunities to, even if things feel in a hurry, to like name what's happening in the moment, in a different way.
mhm.
So that was really great. That was powerful for me. And then my son's really funny enough. He's really like, I say funny enough because, my work is healthy masculinity. Well, my son is it's tough territory for me. He's very averse to sharing about feelings, you know, being vulnerable. Um, but so I asked him this question recently, and he was just like, "Yeah, Dad, you need to play less video games." I like to
Oops.
play a football video game, and on the weekends. And he was like, "Yeah, Dad, I want you to play with me more and not play your video game." And I was just like, I didn't want to hear that when he told me that. I was like,
Yeah, that's a
"What?"
little
I
bit
had
of
all,
a gut punch right
yeah, I
there.
had all my excuses and stories, like, and I could have gone into that, and I could have tried to prove him wrong and make him see that actually, blah blah. But I was just like, nah, dog, like, fair. You want me to do that less and do this other thing with you more? Okay.
Wow. What a amazing lesson to not just ask that from your like primary romantic partner, but to ask from your kids, to give them the space to give you feedback. Not just through their behaviors, but to be invited to give you actual clear feedback, and for you to not punish them or defend against what their feedback is. It's huge for kids.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
it's
can
really important.
see
I'm
I can see you
grateful.
breaking some of the cycles from your family that I don't know that much about it, but I can see that that is inherently a pattern break in your family.
Yeah, definitely. My parents were not asking me those questions. It was more of a don't know, don't care type situation.
Uh-huh. Hence why you never talked to a single soul about anything you
Exactly.
were going through.
It's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Well, one thing I know, just like a bit of a shameless plug,
Yeah.
one thing I know about is that feedback is a really important thing that we all need as people, but especially as men. And if you are listening to this and you haven't identified people that feels safe enough to do that with, one other way to do that is to do the kind of work that I do with horses. I take people out and do experiential learning where you get clear, non-judgmental feedback from a being that doesn't lie, that can't lie, that is
Yeah.
just sensing and responding to what it feels. Doesn't tell a story about it, doesn't judge you about it, but it does respond to what it feels from you.
Yeah.
So if you're really interested in exploring the gap between what your intention is in the world and
Mm,
what your impact is, it's a great place to do it because you get some feedback from an animal that can sometimes be a bridge towards moving in the direction of the human feedback piece of things. So
I love
if you're
that.
not quite there yet with the humans, reach out. Let's do some
Mm,
work with a horse. You'll get some of that same feedback, but in a way that actually isn't so threatening to the ego.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
So I plug my work a little bit. Let's talk
Yeah.
about your work now. So you
Sure.
worked in some domestic violence shelters.
Yep.
You have it caused your own transformation of consciousness as a person.
Yeah.
What are you doing these days to continue on the mission that you're on?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm a leadership coach, um, and I would say there's probably like two parts of what I do. I mean, a lot of what I do is like sort of typical business coaching, business consulting, um, but a major part of what I do is men's work and men's coaching. So I host a monthly online talking circle. It's totally free. It's 90 minutes. It's a big group of us. We get onto a call. It's a talking circle in 3 rounds. It's a confidential space. It's got enough structure. Um, and it's just a really emotionally safe space. What I can say is it's just deep medicine as a man, to show up in a space with a whole group of other men, just like on this call, right? Where it's like, oh wow, we're gonna like let down our guard and say some real stuff that I'm probably not gonna say with guys at work, or you know what I mean, in most of the spaces in my life. Um, so that's sort of like the most accessible thing that I do. I also do some regular like men's feminist book club
Mm.
groups, which I'm obviously a big proponent of. And then I do one-on-one coaching with a lot of men who are just trying to break generational cycles, who are trying to make their grief conscious and acknowledge the pain that they have been disavowing. And especially men who are trying to transform their relationships with women. Those are some of the main things that I do with men.
It's so in line with what both of us are value and why we've chosen the work that we do is that this work is really hard to do alone. I might even argue it's impossible to do alone.
Yeah,
So much of our grief and pain is caused in the relational dynamic between us and other humans, and if we can't really heal that separate from other humans.
yeah,
I think our traditional masculine ways tell us to isolate with it, tell us to try to go it alone and to go on our own hero's journey with it by ourselves. And yet, research says we do way better when we're co-regulating with other people. We
right,
are social creatures for a reason. And I think there are good parts about knowing how to self regulate, but, I think we also need people to help us regulate our nervous
a hundred
systems. And so
percent.
I hear that in like your online group. It's about being in
Yeah,
spaces with other men, taking risks with other men, that
yeah,
emotional exposure and vulnerability piece that you're bringing to that space. Um, the book club is like reading some material that can initially come across as critical towards men
yeah, yeah,
and being able to sit with and get curious about what that brings up in you and how you defend against it. And then coaching, like this is something that many men need, that space to get more curious, because most of us haven't
yeah,
really been taught how to get curious inward.
yeah,
We just hit the defense thing and we lean into
yeah,
it rather than get curious what's underneath that. So
yeah,
I love hearing that each portion of what you're bringing involves togetherness,
yeah,
involves creating belonging and curiosity together, so that we can amplify our efforts together.
yeah. Yeah, I'm really a big believer that this work has to happen in community. You know, it's like because of the nature of the masculinity we need to transform, that if anything, that masculinity is about being like a lone wolf,
Hmm.
self-improvement, self-mastery soldier. And so I see a lot of men who are like, I'm going to fix myself as a man by reading all these books and listening to all these podcasts and never opening up to anybody. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, you're using the problem as the solution, right? So we have to actually be with one another and do things that are really embarrassing in a beautiful
Yes.
way to actually do the transformation that this problem requires, right? Which is about opening up and becoming vulnerable.
I have so been that guy using the problem to try to solve the problem. I have definitely
Same.
been that
Yeah.
guy. Wow. So let's talk a little bit about your online community. Like, what are some of the themes or discussions you've had as a group so far?
Yeah, I mean, I would say kind of have some major streams. One is just like our emotions and our feelings. You know, let's take a minute to practice feeling our feelings. That's something that we'll do regularly. Like, let down your guard, close your eyes, feel the emotion in your body. Like, turn up the volume on that emotion, feel it. Don't think about it, don't diagnose it, don't come to understand it. Feel it, right? So, building that connection with our feeling self is a major theme of the work that we do. And then I think probably the other two things are things that we've been talking about. Um, how am I doing in my accountability to others? Like, where am I scared to be accountable? Um, who do I need to be accountable to? Um, and I think that third part is really just like making our pain conscious, being honest about it, making space for it, acknowledging it. Um, and I guess in that part, you know, what shows up is a part of my story, and I know for a lot of men, in that sort of like I want to avoid the pain is also often the story of addiction,
Hmm.
right? So what are the habits, the things, the substances, the activities, whatever? Because there's so many that I have used to like get away from that pain. And just having a space to check in and be real honest about it without shame, without judgment, without people trying to fix you, just having a space where like, let's tell the truth about these things in our life that can be hard to tell the truth about.
Yeah, there's been something a recent thing I heard that's really helpful when I'm talking to men or when I explore it even in myself around this addiction thing. Because there can be so much shame around addiction. There can be
Yeah.
so much shame around the labels of alcoholism
Yeah.
or drug user or any addict or any of those things. But one way that I've found that I hear people being able to kind of relate to it differently that takes some of the shame out is to pay attention to your reward habits. Like, I
Mm,
think oftentimes we reach for those things. Well, I made it through a tough day, so I get that drink or I
yeah.
get that thing. Like, it's those reward habits. And so it may not necessarily be a full blown, like, chemical, like a physiological addiction that you're
Yeah.
going through, but pay attention to your reward habits because your
Yeah.
reward habits can tell you what you're seeking and what you're reaching for in those and check in. Are those actually aligned with who you want to
Yeah.
be and where you're going?
Yeah. I really love that. That's a really thoughtful way of talking about that.
So you also lead a feminist book club. So if there was a guy listening that was like, okay, I'll do that. I'll
Yeah.
listen to or I'll read a book. You have any books? One book that comes to mind as a good starting place.
Yeah. I was like, man, I wish that Travis would ask me this question. Um, Here it is.
Here it
It's
is.
it's called The Will to Change:
uh,
Men, Masculinity, and Love by Bell Hooks.
Bell
Um,
hooks, great place to start.
yeah, and what I always say about this book, her bigger project, and she has another book by the name of it, it was that feminism is for everyone.
Hmm.
And she wrote this book in a way that your uncle, your grandpa, like men in your life that don't relate to feminism can actually be like, oh, okay, yeah, I do know what she's talking about. Yeah,
Hmm.
that is for me.
Mm,
So I think it's just like one of the best starting points around.
excellent. Great place to start. Thanks for highlighting that. I'm glad I knew to ask that question.
I know.
And then also in your one-on-one coaching, is there a like a core philosophy or a core sort of anchoring point that comes to your coaching that people will know this is the kind of coach I want to work with because he does this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, you know, I really love this Carl Jung quote where he said, if we don't make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life and we will call it fate.
Mm,
And the way that I relate to that, and it's a starting point in so much of my coaching, I think especially the men's work coaching, is so many of us are carrying old bags on our back. And if I say, hey, what about the old bags on their back? Most people say, I have no idea what you're talking about.
yeah, so true.
And I'm just like, and it's so funny because as men's work, it's what you said at the very beginning. It's actually a very disappointing piece of news for most men. It's like, hey, we're going to get started. We're going to change your life. We're going to blow your mind about your future. But here's where we're going to start. You are carrying a really heavy baggage and it's impacting you everywhere. And so many people are just like, no, I'm not.
Mm,
Let's just talk about the future. They don't want to say, hey, these things are holding me back. And so that's really where I love to start with people is like, let us do some grief work. Because I actually believe grief work is a real, practical, accessible skill that we can learn how to do it. And what we do is we make our pain conscious. We metabolize it so that it transforms, so that it doesn't have to be haunting our everyday. But until we do that, it will haunt our everyday. And so that's really, I would say, like, it's a big commitment of mine. I'm always going to say, like, let's start with that grief work. Let's give it some serious attention so that we actually create the conditions for new things to come into our life.
I so love how you put that, and I love the energy you put behind it because so as you're, it is sort of like wah wah when a guy hears we're like, oh, we're gonna
Yeah.
look at this, and it's like, no, I want to
Yes.
look at this over here, and so it can
Facts.
feel a little disappointing or a little like, well, I'm not signing up for that because that
Of
sounds
course.
dumb or boring or awful or
Yeah.
whatever. And yet I feel your passion and excitement for it. And it even oddly feels a little fun in the way that you're presenting it because it's practical, it's doable, and it's also like energizing. It's
Yeah.
also really possible. And I think in some ways, many of us relate to that and push it away because we're like, well, there's nothing I can do about that. There's nothing I can
Exactly.
fix about that. There's nothing practical about that. It's just going to weigh me
Yes.
down.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's exactly right. For me, what my sell to men is the main thing we're actually going to do here is free up energy in your life
Mm,
for creation. So, but step one is to realize, like, I have some energy that it's been busy tending to this unconscious pain for so long that I even forgot about it. So once we actually begin to rearrange some stuff, man, it's an infusion of energy.
Man, that was really helpful for me to even hear too, because I'm always trying to figure out, I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes it's a little bit of an uphill battle trying to get guys to sign up for these things and to say
Of
yes to
course.
them. And so I'm always looking for new ways to share it that
Yeah,
are accessible to people, not as a way of tricking you into something, but it's
that's
just
right.
as a way of being like, this is what it's going to do, and I believe in it, and I've experienced it in my own life, and here's the path we're going to take to get there.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
beautifully said. Well, if people wanted to sign up and start coming to your online community, come to your
Yeah.
book clubs, work with you one on one, how do they find you in the world?
Yeah, so if folks visit me on social media at Life Unbound Coaching, that's my coaching practice, Life Unbound Coaching, spelled just like it sounds, on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I have a link in my bio that has all my programs, lots of really useful free content, and ways to plug in and connect.
Are any of the platforms the ones you're spending the most time on so people know where to get you most clearly?
Yeah, for sure. I am really active on Instagram and TikTok. I have a series, I'll plug it actually. It's called Men in the Wild.
I've been
Uh,
seeing it.
okay, so we find a story each week on the internet, usually from Reddit, of a man and woman, not always, but usually, just having an issue or a conflict, and really break it down to look at how the things we've been socialized into as boys and men sabotage our ability to experience authenticity and connection. So every week I'm posting that on Instagram and TikTok, and it's a great place to connect with me.
Gosh, I just love that every time I doubt that social media has anything valuable for us, that I just find more people that are actually putting out like generous content that is actually helpful and helps us actually reflect on it without some high cost of admission. So thanks
Yeah.
for putting that out there.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Thank you for giving me that feedback and mirroring it back, and I totally agree. It's refreshing when we find that on the internet because oftentimes we don't find
Yeah,
that.
oftentimes it's a disheartening place to be. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Well, Michael, I've had such a lovely time talking with you. Thanks for both sharing your own journey, the work, your perspectives on it, but also even you opening up a little space for me to be vulnerable and share some of what I'm working on as a man. So I appreciate being able to be in this space with you.
yeah, absolutely, Travis. I feel the same way. I know you and I have talked about this before, but just want to like say it really clearly. I am so encouraged and grateful for the space that you're taking up in creating in the culture on the internet with your voice and mission. It just like it means a lot to me, the work you're doing. I think we've talked about there's a lot of men's work out there. A lot of it, plenty of it has good intentions even. Um, but I don't always feel safe
Yeah.
with it, and I don't always feel trusting of its values and its motives. And when I got to know you and I learned about your show and I learned about what your work and what you're doing in the world, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel really safe and grateful with Travis, where I'm doing lots of podcasts, I'm interacting with other men that are doing the work, and I just don't always feel that way. So I just want to say a really clear thank you, and encourage you to keep doing what you're doing because it's really beautiful and impactful.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I especially the language around the space I'm taking up. That doesn't always feel like the easiest thing for me, and it is like doing this work is it's a big part of my own healing journey. So thank you for seeing that, and
Yeah.
thank you for valuing that I take that space up, especially as a gay man doing men's work. I don't always feel that space to be
Yeah.
that's free to take up that space, but
Yeah.
it's good to know that there are men out there that value that and that are open to that.
Yeah, we really need you, and I'm just
Mm,
so, so grateful for what you're doing.
mm.
I mean it.
Well, thank you so much. I'll make sure that your links are in the show notes so people can find you
Yeah,
really easily. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining me. If you want to get in contact with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can also find me on Instagram at travers03. That's where a lot of the ongoing conversations from this podcast are going on. So if you have a question or reflection, that's something that you disagree with in this episode, please find me there and let's have that conversation. And if you're liking this podcast and want to become a supporter of the mission, please go to patreon.com/the new masculine. Thanks again, Michael, for joining me. And until our next episode.